Good afternoon, everyone. I will first observe that I'm starting this talk at the time I was supposed to finish, so we'll have no comments, please, about performance. Firstly, thank you for staying and not drifting off to one of Sheffield's wonderful real ale pubs. I found one last night which had 23 real ales available. In the interest of coherence to that, I only sampled 3/3, you'll be pleased to hear. Look, it's been a wonderful conference today, in spite of, almost, for me as a non-engineer. Some great technical stuff, and some really good general, if you like, managerial messages as well. And I think I'd pick out Dean's point about collective helplessness. The solutions to where we need to get to are entirely and completely within our hands. If we don't adopt the philosophy of collective helpfulness and support, we won't get there. So, Dean, thank you for quoting that. That's excellent. And then 2 from Nigel. First of all, keep it simple. Yeah? The old acronym about KISS, keep it simple, stupid, absolutely applies. And the second one, don't go for utopia. Go for something practical that you can deliver now. As my lovely American bosses told me when they took us over at the time of privatization, the JFDI acronym, just flipping, do it. Not necessarily flipping, of course, but just do it. Don't get paralysis by analysis. We need to move. And some of the things I'm going to come on to talk to you about, I hope that will come through. Right, so this is all about why do we need to do freight electrification, where do we need to do it, and crucially, at what cost. Now, freight matters for electrification for 3, I think, very good reasons. Firstly, it's by far the biggest growth opportunity this industry has. By far. And I'll give you some figures about that. But in a situation where traditional passenger of commuter and business travel is plateaued and it's probably not coming back. Leisure's doing very well, but always remember the leisure travel is low fare, low rated stuff. It ain't where the money is. We've lost the good money that was in commuting and in business. Freight, conversely, is growing and growing apace. Secondly, the case for decarbonisation of freight is very, very strong because of the problems that the alternative modes have. And thirdly, and by far the most important for you guys, is that we can make a case for freight electrification far easier and far better than we can for passenger. Why? Because of the benefit-cost ratios. BCRs of freight schemes are typically 4, 5, sometimes even 6. BCRs on passenger schemes rarely scrape above 2, and there are 1 or 2 of the fairly big schemes around the go at the moment which are struggling to stay above 1. Now, the funding issue is, shall we say, an inconvenient reality. We might wish that Treasury restrictions weren't there, but they are. And unfortunately, unless we take to Treasury through DFT schemes that are fundable and deliver benefits, we're going nowhere. We won't get any more electrification. So it's like not a choice, we've got to do this. And the great thing about freight is that we can do it in a lower cost, potentially we can do it in a lower cost, modular manner that's far more acceptable to Treasury. And that's what we're setting our hand to do. Right, what do I do for moving on, folks? Is it the green button? Yeah, there we go. Great. Okay. So look, we've got to decarbonise existing freight. The diesel locos we have, the Class 66s, reach book life, end of their book life in 2030. They will carry on till the 2040s because, it's wonderful technology that will last forever. And by the way, on embedded carbon, we've got a much better story to tell with railway equipment because it always lasts 30 or 40 years. Cars and trucks get replaced after about 7 or 10 years. Just think about the embedded carbon in the steel in that. We can't build more diesel. Obviously, it's completely inconceivable. HVO, hydro-treated vegetable oil, not please what some people have, I've heard various versions of it, but hydrogenated, I think, is one who hears it. It's hydro-treated vegetable oil. It's very good, but it costs an absolute fortune because everybody wants it. You can't get it, and it's only a transitional fuel anyway because it's not purely decarbonising. It possibly does have a future on remote rural lines, but probably then not because batteries are important for freight, alongside big line haul electric power, 9,000 horsepower, something like that. All new electric loads will have batteries. They'll have them for shunting and freight-only branch lines, which might be 5 or 10 miles long in some cases. And they probably do have applicability on remote rural lines as well. Say far northwest Highland line, things like that, where we might need to go at night. We might need to recharge every 50 miles. But if the passenger train's a battery as well, then we're using the same recharging facilities. But let's not get too het up about batteries, because the big story is it has to be electrification. Right, rail does not exist in a vacuum. The whole of transport, bear in mind, is what the economists call a derived demand. We run trains because somebody wants their goods moved. If there's no goods to move, we don't run the trains. Take it back a step, you provide the infrastructure so we can run the trains to move the goods. Okay, so it all comes back to the end demand of what the end customer wants. He has a choice. He has a choice of road in almost, virtually every case. Now, there's barely not a case where he doesn't have the choice of road transport. Sometimes he has pipelines, sometimes he has shipping, but it's essentially about road. Now, we are still in a better place than road, but they're catching up. So we now have 40-ton HGVs with a payload of about 20 tons, with a range of about 125 miles. And that is going up all the time. At Manchester last year, when I gave a similar presentation, it was 38-ton trucks with about 100 miles. So road is getting better all the time. Those battery trucks are ideal for local and regional distribution. Right? And that sort of trip makes up somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of all lorry journeys in the UK are in those ranges. So actually, we're already well down the road to decarbonising freight movements in the UK on those shorter runs. Batteries are getting better all the time, so are charging facilities. And it is distinctly possible that that sort of 74% that can be done by battery trucks now will head up towards 85 in the next few years. But at the moment, thank the Lord, there is no credible road alternative to the diesel HGV trunker. And that's where we come in. ERS, electric road systems, technically feasible, although never let anybody tell you it's a read across from rail. It is, of course, a read across from trolleybus technology, because there's no return rail for the current. It's a twin wire, twin pantograph system, ERS. But operationally, it's a non-starter. Good Lord, we have enough problems with derailment on the railway, don't we? Where we have a guided system. The idea that truck drivers of distinctly variable ability can stay within literally about 3 inches to the left or right for 8-10 hours at a time is completely inconceivable, even with GPS assistance to do that. Interestingly, ERS is now, I think, on the retreat. Not for those operational and, by the way, safety reasons as well, of course, because you're stringing wires above a public road. But the thing that's starting to kill it, probably, is cost versus revenue. That the cost of doing it would require virtually every single HGV using that stretch of road to have a pantograph and put it up, and that's not going to happen. So it's actually there's a study published by an international institute recently, which more or less said ERS, motorway electrification, probably isn't going to happen. They favoured batteries. They also really said hydrogen is not the answer. Other than a few specific circumstances where you have byproduct hydrogen, which you have on Teesside and Merseyside and one or two places, where by all means use it. Of course, it's a free gift. Put it in the buses, put it in the refuse trucks. The idea of manufacturing hydrogen is lunacy, complete lunacy. Because sheer physics, you need at least 3 times the amount of energy to produce hydrogen, only to convert it back, of course, in a fuel cell to drive a traction motor, than you do using the electricity in the prime form. And Mr. Dearman, your president, tells me it's not 3 times, it's 5 times. So, hey, somewhere in that. But it's a very, very power inefficient means of transmitting fuel. So for all those reasons, the new model of logistics, which we're starting to see now, is trunk by electric rail, distribute by battery truck. Now that clearly requires a multimodal approach. We've got to get people thinking outside modal silos. Now that's sort of more my job than yours, but trust me, it's a heck of a task, because the current generation of logisticians, they've spent their careers in rubber tyres. They only understand rubber tyres. There's very few that understand rails. So there's a big job to be done in getting to opening their minds. It is starting to happen. And it's all about using intermodal equipment, containers and swap bodies. You can't touch the goods intermediately, you can't handle them intermediately. That's a complete no-no. But we now have a very good range of containers and swap bodies which replicate 98-99% of what a truck trailer would do, the top half of a trailer without the wheels. We are incidentally on the verge of starting to move lorries on trains in the UK, but only on HS1 for the gauge reasons. We're about to see a train from Germany into Barking coming at HS1. That's helpful because at least it will open people's minds to thinking about rail with equipment they are familiar with. So this is all about modal shift, okay? Yes, we have to decarbonise what we already do by rail, but it's much more about attracting more from road, that road trunking, to rail. That's what really builds the BCRs, the benefit cost ratios. That's what justifies electrification. And if we can do sections of the line for freight, then obviously the passenger service on those same line will also be able to use electric traction. Incidentally, by the way, motorway electrification only benefits trucks. Doesn't benefit anything else. No buses, no cars, nothing. It's only for trucks. That's a really important point to bear in mind. So we tried to quantify the scope for modal shift. We've got to put some numbers on this. You know, anything you try to take to Treasury, it's got to have numbers on it. DFT are fine, by the way. DFT are absolutely with us on all this. What we need to do is to make bullets for DFT to fire towards Treasury. So this is all about presenting a case for DFT to take to Treasury. So the numbers, the analysis we did, based on government's own road freight statistics, and comparing it to what we already do. So that's non-bulk freight, consumer goods, containers, etc., over about 200 kilometres, and heavy bulk freight like aggregates, steel, over about 100. That's what we do day in, day out. 53% of all HGV 10 kilometres fall into those two brackets. That's not 53% of trunk HGV kilometres, 53% of all. Because whilst 60-70% of trips are short distance, the longer distance stuff, of course, ramps up the kilometres hugely. So in terms of 10 kilometerage, it's 53%. Now, not all of that is going to switch to rail. You know, life's not like that. There'll be multiple reasons why it won't happen, not least because on some flows there isn't the concentration of movement to make a viable train. But in most cases, the volume of HG movements is on the motorways, to which we have a parallel railway route. So pulling that 53% back to what we think is a very realistic modal switch potential, we think it's about 38% of all HGV 10 kilometres. Over a third of HGV 10 kilometres in the UK, we believe, are suitable for switching. That's about 50% of the tonnes, but 53% of the kilometres. So, electric rail trunking is I think, pretty much widely accepted now as a viable option. It wasn't 5 years ago. The Transport Decarbonisation Plan clearly accepts and promotes the fact that modal shift to rail has to have a major role in decarbonisation, and electrification is the only trunking option. What does that mean? Well, back to numbers. The core freight network in the UK is about 2,000 miles. 2/3 of that is already wired. Now, if you forget everything else I tell you today, please remember that. 2/3 of the network that we use for the vast majority of freight is already electrified. Yes, Nigel, a lot of it on the southern, but you know that counts too. We want to run freight on your railway too. So, the conclusion from that is that we only need about 800 route miles to take 95% of freight electrically hauled. 95%. It's probably going to be more than that because modal switch will put even more on those main corridors, and the 5% around the periphery will become progressively a smaller proportion. 800 route miles, about 2,400 STKs. Compare that, please, to TDNS, Traction Decarbonisation Network Study, which was 13,000 STKs. Frankly, that was too big to fund. It's a great piece of work, as others have said today, but presentationally, we probably shouldn't have put it forward as one big blob. We should have put it forward as progressive elements which could be done over the years. It spooked the Treasury, frankly. Too big, too much commitment in one go. So, in contrast to that, we're talking about a much smaller ask in total, which makes it more fundable, and we can do it in a modular fashion, not all at once. So, where? So, we in CRT produced a map a few months ago, which hopefully at least some of you have seen, and a commentary to go with it. Maps are wonderful. I'm a geographer, so I would say that. But it's the simplicity, the visual simplicity, the fact it's easy to grasp. And what we were trying to bring out, and I'll show you the map in a minute, is a prioritisation of a handful of very small infill sections. You'll see them in red. They're just low-hanging fruit. You know, in total, 60 miles, and that would allow us to decarbonise 2 million train miles a year. Right? And that's equivalent to, let's call it, about 80 million HEV miles a year. Once we've got that, the basic stuff, those infills done, we go on to a progressive strategy, which is broadly going to be about 40 miles a year over 20 years. So not a big ask. It's equivalent to about one road scheme a year. So if you put in context that DfT have just authorised the A417 road scheme, a place called the Air Balloon, if you know, it's on the route that joins the M4 and the M5. It's assessed at being somewhere between 250 and 500 million pounds for one road scheme. We can do an awful lot with that money. So there's the map. I know it's a bit of an odd map projection, for which apologies, and you probably won't be able to pick out too much. But I will just say the red, London Gateway, Acton Willesden, Nuneaton, Birmingham, Lawley Street, Hare Park Junction into Wakefield and Leeds, and Seaforth Branch. That's it. That's all we need to do to take 2 million train miles capable of being electrically hauled. And we've already got the electric locos to do that. There's quite a lot of electric locos parked up at the minute, actually. They'll need an overhaul, but we've got the kit to enable us to do that. The blue, of course, is the already electrified network. The orange is the freight strategic network that we seek to move towards over the next 40 years. We'd like to do it sooner, next 20 years. We'd like to do it sooner, and with funding you could. So, cost. £2.5–3 million a single track kilometre, we all know, is a non-starter. Now, sadly, my spies are telling me that it isn't only Great Western that's coming out of that sort of number, that some of the more recent schemes are coming out of that number as well. That's a disaster. I'm not using that word to exaggerate it. That's a disaster. £1.5 million, which the Scots are achieving, the Treasury aren't very excited about. They just care about the numbers. We need to get below £1 million per single track kilometre to succeed. And that's in spite of the fact that, as I said earlier, that freight generates very good BCRs. So what essentially we're suggesting here is that if we don't get the numbers right, electrification in toto is dead in the water. It is. Yeah? It really, I'm sad to say it really, really is. If we can get some of these smaller freight schemes started and demonstrate that we can do it cheaply, then we've got to start to build credibility and then go up the speed scale. It's not going to wash coming down decrementally from 2.5 million. We have to do a step change and then go back up the scale for higher speed capability. Now, the good news there is that with Peter's good offices and one or two other people in this room in the contracting world and design world, we are looking at a case study of a freight-only branch, but it's not a 20-mile-an-hour branch, by the way. It's got a decent speed. And the initial work is suggesting that we can bring that in at around about £600,000 per single track kilometre. Now, we said in the commentary to the map there were credible grounds for believing we could deliver half the emerging costs. It's now looking that we can come in at about a third or maybe even a quarter. Now, at that point, Treasury's grounds for resisting authorising some electrification are starting to get a bit weak. And there's every chance, especially coming up to an election, that we might be able to get something through. How do we do that? How do we need to get to those much, much lower numbers? Well, you know better than I do really, but these are my thoughts on it. Maximum efficiency in design. Do it quickly, do it as quickly as you can, consistent with safety, with a minimum materials, plant and labour cost. The longer you're on site, the more that costs. If you can do concentrated work, time burns cash, as I've said there. You've all got to make money. You know, contractors have to make, of course you have to make profit, but what we need to do is demonstrate value in the engineering and in the indirect costs as well. Now, it's not always, not often I suspect, the metal and the concrete you put in the ground. It's the indirects and the overheads that go with it that drive the cost up. We've got to root those out. And also, the other purpose of the study we're doing is, as well as better engineering, a much better delivery model. Because it grieves me considerably that on Great Western, for every £1 spent out on the track, putting stuff in the ground, £2 was spent in an office. That cannot be right. That just cannot be right. We've got to come up with a new delivery model. You know, I'm really pleased that several people have sort of said today, either explicitly or implicitly, no more gravy train. You know, the days of great profit margins have gone. If we want to have a viable electrification business, we've got to bring it back to value. Value drives everything. And yes, there will need to be a new compensation regime. That, you know, the idea that train operators who are going to benefit from the electrification could be paid millions of pounds in compensation to have it electrified is somewhat counterintuitive, so we say. So, I'm rattling through this in view of the late start I was given. So, to conclude, we must decarbonise existing rail, but the big prize is modal shift of getting around a third of HGV ton kilometres onto rail. By the way, that about trebles what we currently do. And yes, there is capacity, before anybody asks. It's equivalent to 1 or 2 more freight paths per hour. Now, Dean is probably thinking, what does that mean in terms of power supply? And you're right, and there's conversations to be had about that, about where, what type of train, at what time, what origins, destinations. We've sort of done that with Eastern, with colleagues, but we can certainly do the same with other regions as well. The new model of logistics, this intermodal idea of trunk by electric rail, distributed by battery truck, is the best opportunity the railways had in decades. We now have people coming to us to say, I think there's something here for my company. And we're not talking about trivial people, we're talking about Tesco, we're talking about Coca-Cola, we're talking about maritime transport, who are now all using trains, their own trains on a daily basis, multiple daily trains in some cases, even Coca-Cola, 2 trains a day for Coca-Cola. We've got to get these low-hanging fruit nailed. The small infill schemes on the back of the sort of costs of the coming out from the work we do, we've got to nail those. We've got to restart the process of electrification. Sadly, it is cost, cost, and cost. Sorry, that is all there is to it. The only chance we've got to get Treasury to budge on this is by demonstrating value, and that's a lot of that. It's about indirects and overheads, which are evil. So basically, either we demonstrate value for money, or we don't get any more wires. It's about as simple as that. But the great thing is that, as we've seen today, it is entirely doable. If we adopt a new approach of really attacking both the engineering and particularly the delivery and overhead sort of costs, we can get there. We can do it. I'm absolutely sure we can. There we go, folks. I've really rattled through that at pace to enable you to get home or to the pub sooner than otherwise would be the case. Happy to take any questions.